Google doesn't have a human resources department, not like other companies. Instead, they have a people operations division, or POPs for short. And like everything Google does, POPs is completely data-driven, and it's obsessed with employee happiness. When someone gets pregnant at a normal job site, and they complain about how short maternity leave is, human resources might send a request to payroll to see if they can get an extended vacation just this once. But when Google realized new mothers were quitting the company, Google turned its social scientists and vast analytics network onto the problem. POPs crunched the numbers and found that, yes, the maternity leave was too short. And by increasing the amount of paid time new mothers got, they could reduce their attrition by a whopping 50%. Because it was far less costly to pay maternity leave and keep their new mothers than to pay to hire and train all new techs. Google also used their vast analytics to determine that 4 interviews was the optimum number for new hirees. Any more than 4, the information gleaned during the interviews came at diminishing returns, and it scared off other job seekers. POPs also discovered that middle managers were, in fact, a good thing. Despite their negative reputation, skilled middle managers also lowered employee attrition rates. POPs found that base pay means more to employees than bonuses or perks. And POPs was the reason Google started putting gourmet food in their lunchroom and Wi-Fi in their parking shuttles. It was all a calculated balancing act to maintain the employee happiness index. But there was one question POPs couldn't seem to get right. One dilemma that every business under the sun faces today. The same issue that spawned a multi-billion-dollar team-building industry, which seems to annoy employees at best and so mistrust at its worst. The problem they sicked POPs on was teams and team building. Or how do we make the most efficient business teams? POPs and Google's social scientists tried over and over to discover the ingredients that went into crafting the perfect corporate team. What they found was both surprising and something their data engineers couldn't have anticipated. You're listening to The Re-Engineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Laments, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of no-duh on the internet and get to the facts.
Last month, during our episode about building a productive entourage, we briefly referenced a study that came out about the HR department within Google, the infamous People Operations Team. That's because POPs uncovered some very interesting and very surprising data on how high-achieving teams work and why some all-star dream teams underperform, despite having all the talent on their side. So today, we want to use Google's data to bust a few myths we all share about building successful teams. Myths like Myth 1. 80% of corporate meetings are wasted time. Maybe all team meetings are unnecessary. And if everyone just pitched in equally, the work would just get done. Myth 2. The best teams in business are all-star teams, where everyone in the meeting room is a pro. Or maybe best teams are made up of friends, or all introverts, or all extroverts. Myth 3. Any team can thrive if you have the right atmosphere. The best team atmosphere is when everyone gets down to business right away. Or is it the other way around? Maybe the best teams are all chatty and friendly with each other, and a little wasted time is just part of the process. We'll dig deep in the research to bust these myths. But first, I'd like to share with you the inception of our episode today. Oh, and if you stick around to the end of the episode, as a bonus, we'll answer the burning question that fuels a multi-billion-dollar industry. Do corporate team building exercises actually work?
So this comes from a New York Times article, which is kind of amazing. It's called What Google Learned from Its Quest to Build the Perfect Team. And basically we're covering our entire episode on this.
We probably could have wrote about 3 episodes about it.
Yeah.
It is rich and dense and interesting.
It so much reminded me of we were in a club, Todd and I, where it kind of fell apart briefly because the team sort of like wasn't able to cover for somebody having a meltdown.
Fell apart permanently at this point.
Yeah.
It never really recovered, but it was a terrible thing because we had a team that was an all-star team, people from very diverse backgrounds, all lights out public speakers.
Right. That's kind of why I wanted to cover this, is because we had basically a group of superstars, and it imploded. And
why don't you tell that story?
Okay. Well, we had, like Todd said, just a bunch of people who had like literally won awards, and then like we had a member join who kind of was like, I'll say a hot mess. They themselves were very motivated and very self-interested, and everyone sort of dogpiled on them to like tell them that they were not dysfunctional as a public speaker, but like they tried to correct them, and the group fell apart. Like it's so weird to watch sort of like a public speaking group come off the rails.
Well, and it's built on encouragement. It's a safe space.
That's exactly why. I think it's actually the pressure of being a safe space made them not want to criticize, and so like,
and they let it just eat away until it got too
right. Exactly. So without correction or criticism, it just sort of fell apart. But I've noticed this about creative things, like specifically. I come from a writing background, and I also I went to college for art, and so anything that's creative, you're supposed to be encouraging. So anytime you make a team around encouragement and something that is subjective, that isn't like, I mean, like if you're building a car, you can look at a car and be like, that's wrong.
Right, by how fast it goes and how long it lasts. But creative things are a little different. When
Right.
they're not done yet, a lot of times, and that person's not done with their work. But again, who are you to judge it if it might be great, right?
Right, exactly. There's an objective measure. So without an objective measure, you're basically left with, does this work? Doesn't it? Is this interesting? Is it beautiful? Whatever.
Well, you short sold us on the story. So how did it end?
It ended with the team basically devouring themselves. In the end, our group was, I'm not going to say less well off for it, but we lost things. We lost members. We lost momentum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we can't ask you about a negative one without asking you about a positive one. Tell me about a team you've been a part of that was amazing.
The most amazing team I've been a part of so far has been a writer team that I've been on the forums for. I'm in writing contests, and I've been on Writers of the Future for a while. It's hard to talk about them without mentioning that they are like culty. I mean, like it's Writers of the Future is associated with L. Ron Hubbard, so like I can't get on their forum without thinking like this guy started basically a cult. But one of their writers started a forum. His name is Wolf Moon, and everybody on there is incredible. Like they're award winning, and they they're super supportive. Like, they're professionals who reach back and like pull people up.
So how much of that team do you think got those people to that level? And are those people reaching hands down to bring them up?
Right. And part of what they're doing too is that they collaborate with younger writers who have insights, and they let them talk too. So like, it's an open forum, so they're all sort of communicating at the same time.
You better not be spoiling. Everyone's heard. Don't be a spoiler, man.
Right.
Well, let me tell you about one I had.
Please.
I had a house painting company up in Seattle. And what I noticed was there was just amazing communication in our company. Now, we were a company of mostly Hispanic, Koreans, and Mongolians. So we all spoke different languages, but we all had respect for everyone else's skills, which is funny because we're all from different cultures too.
Right.
And everyone liked the fact that they were working with someone who was not an American, so they got to be themselves. They got to eat their food together, and it just blended. It was just a very. Now, on the flip side, I was in the car business for a long time, and I worked at a dealership that had very, very, very overbearing bosses. They reminded you that they were the bosses. Nobody was listening to you. You were never heard. The company would always, like, let's say, Joe, you've been at the company for 7 years. What you thought or your opinion on it had no value. But some person from outside the company, whatever they had to say was bond, was gold.
Okay.
Now, one thing I learned from this company that when there's massive turnover, you think, well, what does that have to do with me, right? I still work here. I'm still getting paid. But massive turnover wears on you too, you know? And it's hard because your talented, loyal, hard workers are treated poorly, and you have to see that. It kind of gives you a little PSD, you know what I mean?
Right. Like when you see incredible turnover, but you're the person that remains, like you're the rock in the stream, that grates on you.
Have you ever worked at a job where you see people being verbally abused or just treated unfairly?
Currently work at that job, actually.
How does it make you feel?
It kind of makes you feel like you're the immovable object, and everybody else is just passing through, and that in itself can just slowly wear away at you.
Micro stress. Now, I don't know if you ever noticed about life. Have you ever noticed that the people you love and look up to seem to always move away?
Right.
And the son of bitches seem to stay around forever?
Are they better off? Like, I always ask that question, like, if somebody leaves my job, I'm like, they must be going to better places.
They came
must have
to their
found something.
senses.
Yeah, they came to their senses, right. So we're going to get into what makes a good team according to science and according to Google. And we're going to get into who actually came to their senses. If people move away and go to a new team, or if they go to a new job or something, we're going to get into the statistics behind that. So a quick question for you. Have you been a manager in the past? And when you were a manager, how much was it collaborative? Like how much was getting people to work together?
I think I'm pretty much an agreeable person. One thing is I don't ever hold any rank or say any rank. I say no one's worked for me. We work together.
Okay.
And I pride myself in really seeing and all my things that I've done leadership wise have been sales oriented. So I kind of go by the thing of a NFL football team.
Okay.
How you put people in position to be successful. You know, you can't have people at different positions. So whatever someone's good at, I want them to do more of that. And whatever they're poor at, I want them to hand that off to somebody else.
Okay. I think that's a really good philosophy.
But you need a diverse team for that. We can't have a bunch of Joe and Todds. We already got that position.
Right. We're filled here for egotistical jerks who think they know everything.
Who love their voice so much they started a podcast.
Right. So before we started the research for this episode, I kind of assumed that, let's say, collaborative teamwork, that it was overrated. Like we had a line in our introduction that was like that was talking about like meetings are overrated, that we actually don't need to have as many business meetings as we do. That when we sit in the boardroom and we listen to somebody ramble about their emails, it's unnecessary. But the research kind of shows that that's going on the incline, that we can expect more of those, actually, that team meetings and like having businesses need us in the boardroom is actually going to increase.
So what you're saying too is you don't really believe in teams. So, it's everyone for themselves.
Right.
Yeah, we're here to work. We can play these little games, but
I myself like to believe in the individual creator or artist who just quietly whiles away the hours themselves, but that's not actually the case. Collaborative activities have ballooned, according to Harvard Business Review, by like 50% or more. So we are slowly doubling how much business meetings mean and how many we use. So yeah, my idea of having the solo artist in their garage figuring things out, that's going away. So you and the painter team.
You need a team to win, Joe.
Yeah, totally. We're going to link off to this HBR article. It's called Collaborative Overload, and it's pretty fantastic. But they talk about in this article about how 300 organizations that they studied, they were looking for who individually contributes to a team or to a business, like during a meeting. And they found that 20 to 35% of value-added collaborations only comes from about 3 to 5% of the people. So if you're sitting in a meeting room, like you and I have,
that's not many.
Right, like basically one person is contributing the bulk of the progressive ideas.
And that's a problem. That's
right.
A problem. One voice gets old.
Right. They reference a University of Iowa study that talks about like they call it the extra miler. Like a single employee who contributes beyond the scope of their what they are expected to do.
So you're not talking about the person holding the meeting, you're talking about one of the attendees.
Right. Somebody in the meeting is going to be like they will be contributing the bulk of the ideas, or even if they're not contributing the ideas, they'll be moving things.
I know these guys. This is like a guy named David who will say, I want to ask a question for the group.
Exactly.
And we're like, dude, you corner him in the bathroom and say, don't ask any more questions for me.
Right.
We don't care. Yeah, they're just kind of showingly, right?
Right. If they're not doing the idea management, they are moving things along. But this also leads to something that HBR refers to as in demand yet disengaged, because if you let somebody do this for long enough, and this is sort of upheld by their study and their research, if you let somebody be the driving or linchpin for a team for too long, they will become disengaged. Like they will lose their steam, basically. So we're going to, throughout this episode, we're going to look at that as sort of like a phenomenon, the most in demand, the most engaged person in a team. And we're going to try to discuss how to build a whole team. We're going to talk about what happens when you make a team full of extra milers. And we're going to talk about what happens when you sort of build a dream team, quote unquote. Because oftentimes a dream team is not what we would think. Like I would think in a public speaking group, a dream team would be just like 19 Todds.
Thank you, Joe. I think about 19 Joes, but
I'm the introverted evaluator, and Todd is the extroverted speaker. So a dream team would be like 3 me's and 17 Todds. But But yeah, that's actually not the case, according to this New York Times article. So again, I will reference it over and over again. We're going off of what Google learned from its quest to build a perfect team. That's the article we're hitting on today. And again, it's super surprising. It's basically, it comes down to safe space, which is an interesting way to sort of put this in a nutshell. So do you want to get started on what Project Aristotle was?
That's a good lead-in. Project Aristotle. That's what Google called. That's what Pops called this project they started up. Now, Google was one of the first and definitely the biggest to start watching their employees to see how they could be more productive. Now, I want to talk about this first. Is the reason they did this was to make more money.
Right.
I think this article comes off a little bit like they care about people. No, they wanted more production, and they wanted to do it for cheaper. Now, this isn't just HR doing workplace surveys, or you sit down with your middle manager and he gives you a review. This is not that. This is a whole new level. They spent millions and millions of dollars, and not over 1 year, Joe, but over a whole decade.
Okay.
Now, this shows commitment. And the reason they did this was because they saved and made a lot more money. Big results. Now, this is what kind of spoke to me, Joe. And you and I sometimes joke about this. You get these books, you go to like Kinko's or FedEx store, and they have these books on the shelf that say, how to reward your employees without giving them any more raises or money.
Right. How to give them incentives without raising their base pay.
Yeah, it just pisses me off, right? Now, this tech giant, which you think of very analytical computer engineers, right? When you think of Google, they analyzed every part of their employees' life. And this is what they found. They found that great managers are not critical and micromanagers, but the best managers are the best communicators.
Okay, so they can talk to people.
Absolutely. They're not overbearing. They listen to their employees. Because communication is what? Probably 90% listening, I would say.
Right.
Now, Google got real granular with this team stuff because they couldn't get some data that they could duplicate. So they couldn't figure it out. So they had to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, before this study, the experts at the company thought, I think like most of us think, introverts like hanging out with introverts. Extroverts like hanging out with extroverts. People like sports like to hang out with sports people, right?
Right.
Gamers like to hang out with gamers. Readers, you get it going on and on. But the research started really scrutinizing the compositions of the groups, the winning teams, the so-so teams, and then the losing teams.
Right.
So they also thought they went into the same hobbies, we talked about gaming or sports or whatever. The one they really thought was gonna be a home run was their educational background. And we've talked about that in some of our episodes, the status.
Okay. Socioeconomic class, that kind of thing.
They couldn't find a mix with it. They couldn't find what the right gender balance was either. They didn't know if the group should be all outgoing or all shy. And they looked at, Joe, 180 teams.
Okay. So they're when you say granular, like they are 180, that is not a small sample size.
Yeah, they drive a Subaru. They like to knit. It's a woman 32. She went to Purdue University. So, and what they found from 180 teams, who we know are pretty good at figuring things out. Pretty smart people, right?
Right.
Analytics-wise, it was inconclusive. There was no common makeup for a winning team.
Okay. If you and I were on these teams, or if we were in their sample groups, we would never be paired together. Like they were looking for, from what I can understand, they put extroverts with extroverts, introverts with introverts. Like they were literally trying to find perfect teams based on how they would work together.
They weren't putting them together. They were just watching them.
Okay.
So this wasn't that, and I think that's important to point out. This study wasn't done on, so it wasn't competitive. These guys didn't know what was going on. They just set up cameras everywhere and spied on these motherfuckers.
Right.
Kind of intrusive, right?
The best part of this article, by the way, is the New York Times had a picture that was just a giant microscope facing people. Because if you're listening to this and you don't know this, Google has the best analytics software in the world. And so like them turning this on their own people is kind of like facing a giant microscope or a lens on their own sort of like human resources department.
So when you're in the bathroom at Google, you're like, I just feel like somebody's watching me.
Right.
They really are.
They are literally timing you. Yeah, in almost every way. So we had an episode about entourages that I want to reference because we found out in that episode that groups of people, friend groups, look like chemical bonds. That when you look at the way people interact and the way they communicate, the composition of the way people share information actually looks like a cluster of chemicals sharing bonds, and then there will be like one connector who shares that information to the next group of bonds. So that's kind of what Google found out too, that during their research and during the study, they found out that groups of people kind of act that same way, that they kind of look like that in a boardroom. If you have 17 people sitting down in a boardroom, one person will actually be a bond for like several of the groups, and they will bring that information into the group they're sitting down with.
And I've seen this one, like you do breakout rooms. I've worked for big corporations, and you do. Certain people kind of take a leadership role. Some people are followers. Some people are, are the spokesperson for the group, just naturally.
Right, and it can be surprising who is that bond. Like when you sit down in a boardroom, somebody will just sort of like raise their hand, and they're not necessarily the expert, quote unquote. It will just be somebody who just has a lot of experience with other groups, and you find out that they are a wealth of information.
The confidence, right, to kick it off.
Right. So, kind of what we're jumping ahead on is this study that Google did. They found out that communication is absolute key. The people that are actually doing the communication, that are effectively being the linchpin of the team, they're not necessarily the biggest expert in the room. That's kind of the fallacy that a lot of team building does, is the idea that the expert will take over.
Yeah, the smartest one.
Right.
The guy who's done this for 30 years, who knows it all inside out.
Right. The person who's been in the group the longest, or business the longest, that they will sort of like lead the team. That's actually not really true. They may lead the team, or they may sort of like lead the communication, but having everybody have their say seems to way more significantly in team building than the expertise does in team building. According to the study, they talk about how individual intelligence, personality, and skill are all sort of like combined, do not outweigh communication itself.
See, I like this right off, Joe, because I think a lot of times with young people, they don't get to be heard. And another person doesn't get heard a lot is people that worked at other companies.
Right.
It's like, shouldn't we listen to them because they have maybe some insight and expertise that we don't have at this company?
Right. Yeah, you'd think people with like outside knowledge would be valued. Instead, we scream at them new fish like they're in prison.
And that's why we hired them, because they had specific industry experience. And then we ignore them.
Right, exactly. But that is basically everything Google found. Like, I'm going to short track us to Google's research, but they found out that communication basically overcomes everything. That having people actually like sit, talk, and communicate, it outweighs what do you call it? Personal. Like engineers, like that's what Google is dealing with, by the way. Like their team building is team building for tech people and engineers and people who are doing programming. So it's really heady stuff. And individual experience kind of didn't play as much of a factor in their best teams. Have you ever sat down with a team that you think should be all stars? Like when I joked about like a team of all Todd.
I have, and it doesn't work out. I mean, sometimes it's like too many people want to be the bosses, and then too many people aren't interested. It really takes a mix of different backgrounds, different ages, different genders, different life experiences. But what you're saying is, if you get all these smart people, real talented people together, it should be great, and it's just not.
Right, exactly. Yeah, if it's everybody is a talent, if everybody is a shooter, then you basically end with a boardroom of people who are just going to be talking over each other.
Nobody listening, just emptying the well.
Right. We are going to get into a little bit of like what makes a team work better together. But basically what the data has sort of upheld is that having open communication and having opportunities to talk outside of the boardroom is almost equally important to having people communicate while they're in the boardroom. Todd, do you watch Game of Thrones?
Oh yeah, yeah, I love that show.
I'm kind of kidding a little bit. We joke about Game of Thrones and stuff, but the idea that you would stop and like talk about which house you're for, Lannister or Stark, that plays a huge part of building teams. One of Google's analytics revealed that, not Game of Thrones specifically, but the idea that you would communicate outside of work, that you would talk about Game of Thrones or children or something. The whole idea that somebody would like a productive team is communicating on other levels other than work.
So let me ask this, Joe. So if we were on a productive team and I came to talk to you about the football game I just watched, after your eyes glazed over, how long could you take me talking about that? Would you be able to be polite enough to?
Well, this is actually part of their study is that you would have to make me interested in the score, but that exercise, it's called theory of mind. It's the idea that you would be able to recognize what I am and am not interested in.
Okay.
That would actually be part of this, is you would approach me, ask me about the football game, and you'd realize my eyes were glazing over.
And I'd move on to a story that I read that I thought was cool, or a show that I think you would like from my other experiences with you.
Exactly. So part of this side talk would actually be working on my mind. Like it would be productive because we would be talking about things that would eventually get back to work. Like we would go to the boardroom next, and you'd be like, okay, this guy will not get sports.
Well, wouldn't that be nice to teach the world this, so we could all know when to put the gas down and then when to change lanes?
Communication.
Because don't you hate it when someone talks about something like, I'm non-political, and it just seems like everyone wants to talk to me about politics, and I just don't want to talk about it. I have zero interest.
Unfortunately, that's most of podcasts and entertainment today is. But yeah, Google is all over this. Like they're in their quest to build perfect teams. They figured out that side talk and getting people to recognize what people are interested in, like how they can communicate, is almost equally important to their skill level and everything else combined. So it's a huge portion. Part of this HBR article, they talk about how one of the things they did to increase productivity for lower performing teams is for call centers, they actually started synchronizing their coffee breaks. Really? So that people would actually be able to talk. I mean, like not Game of Thrones, but they'd be able to talk about stuff outside of work.
Okay, so instead of having it just sparse in the break room, it was just packed, so you had to talk to somebody.
Right, exactly. Like it would be awkward if they weren't chatting with each other.
There's fun chatting it up at work, though.
Right.
I'm a chatter. I'll work the room, man.
Oh my God. I'm weirdly glad we've never worked together, because I am awkward and you would make me more awkward, just like engaging me. So
I can just see you kind of with your cup of noodle soup, just kind of with a pissed off look on your face, going out of your way to be, porcupine unapproachable. Am I warm here?
It's almost like you've seen me at work. So are there unwritten rules? Like, is there a way that, like, how do we make teams work, especially for people like me, like people like you said, cup of noodles, arms crossed in the corner, not wanting to chat with anybody? How do we get that to work?
Well, let me tell you, I don't know, but let me tell you what Google thinks. Now, it's important again to point out that these people were not coached. If they would have been coached, this would have all been skewed. None of this research would have worked, and they know that. This is what they found. They found the best place to observe high achievers wasn't in the bathroom. It was in the lunchroom, just like we talked about.
Okay.
And they found that the people that always sat with the same people, like, kind of like the high school, how you eat with the same friends in high
cliques,
school?
Yeah.
The cliques. Those were the least productive people.
Really? So, like, the jocks all sitting together, that's not productive?
No, and you would think they would, because they get some chemistry, they get to know each other, they have backgrounds, right?
Okay.
So I thought that was very interesting. Now, they also, this is how down their analytics got. They even kept track of who, Joe Anthony ate with Todd, we ate with Sarah, all the different groups. They kept track of all that.
Of course.
Sounds really boring, doesn't it?
Google's super eye in the sky monitoring their own employees. That makes sense.
Big brother, right? Now, what they found, the most productive people by far always sat with different people, always went to different groups. What do you think of that, Joe?
It sounds to me like old Renaissance courts. Like the most wise kings ate with different subjects every day because they got to, they almost Socrates did. Like they got to hear multiple views.
Seek the counsel of wise men.
Right.
Now, the theme that ran through all the research and in all the articles was the groups where everyone got to speak were the ones that won.
Okay.
Now, the groups where people felt comfortable and they felt like they could be vulnerable enough to give the ideas that they had, they felt like they're in the safe space, the whole team benefited from it. Not bullied or micromanaged by middle managers, which is why middle managers get a bad reputation, right?
Right. Well, I think that middle managers usually get a bad reputation. I mean, forgive me for assuming, but I think it's usually because people think that they will jump in and tell you how your job is supposed to be done when you've been doing it longer than the manager has.
Every day, all day long.
Right. But they're actually a benefit?
They are when they listen to their team. And
Okay.
everyone gets a chance to talk, whether you've been there one day or you've been there your whole life. Now, another thing, this was a big one, you touched on this earlier, was average social sensitivity. And what that is, it's kind of a fancy way of saying intuition on what other people are feeling, their tone of voice, their nonverbal cues, how their day is. If they're sad, you notice. If they're not themselves, you don't just, some people don't know shit. They just, they can't tell to leave you alone. They can't tell that you've had enough. They don't see the eyes glassed over. They can't tell you haven't had any sleep.
They can't tell that you're not into Game of Thrones, that you're not House Stark.
It wasn't the people that were the most, it wasn't a popularity contest. So it wasn't the people who were the most creative, the most intelligent, and it wasn't my least favorite people are the people who have been there the longest and remind you of that every 5 seconds.
Right.
So it was none of those things. It was just how they all blended together and listened to each other and had what we always go for, mutual respect.
Okay. So the safe communicative space is, I hate to say it, but Reddit might be right on this. Like the safe space of communication might actually win the day.
Now, this might sound like some no duh, but let's face it. We all work. Is our job really like this?
Right.
Or no, it's the exact opposite. It's what we touched on before. One person does all the talking. We're not heard. We're not valued.
I was in a meeting just a couple days ago, and it was just sort of listening to the guy who felt he was the person who had earned his space, like he had earned the job. He had been there the longest, and he rambled the most, and he was ready to teach everybody. And it was a complete waste of time for everybody.
The Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Exactly, yeah. Somebody who thinks that they are Obi-Wan, and then they just burn time. Can we talk a little bit about? I hate to say this. In fact, I think it's like touching holy water. Like I might burn to say this, but you want to talk about sports?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever heard that teams that touch each other, that high five and slap asses, they do better?
Really? I didn't know that.
Okay.
I just thought that was emotional part of it. I didn't know that it had some value. Really?
It totally does. So there's a study, an NBA study, where they talk about how team members who touch each other, who high five and
it's not ass slap, it's butt slap. By the way,
butt slap. Okay, yeah. But the teams that have the most physical contact, they actually perform better.
I love that. So the hugs and the high fives and when they pick each other up.
Right, the physical support, it actually does play a factor. But that was just sort of like a fun fact that I wanted to put in this episode. But yeah, for Google and building perfect teams, if you want to build a good team, not only does communication and side talk matter, so does physical movement. So like in post-COVID world, of course, once everybody gets vaccinated, touch means something.
Well, I got to tell a story from this year.
Please.
The Kansas City Chiefs went to the Super Bowl, and early in the season, Patrick Mahomes and his star receiver, Tyreek Hill, they scored a touchdown together. And Tyreek Hill is about half the size of Patrick Mahomes. So he went and he jumped on his back, and then he made like he was riding a horse, and they ran around the whole stadium. And it was just so elementary school silly that you couldn't help but laugh. But you could tell that these two genuinely really like each other.
Right.
He let him ride him like an animal all the way around. So that's why they're winners. That's one of the reasons they're winners.
They didn't mention riding somebody like a horse in this study, but I can only imagine that has to be part of it, right?
That's the next level from butt slapping.
Yeah, that's a little bit higher. We're doing that after the show, by the way. So this Harvard Business Review article that we're going to link off to, it basically supports everything Google had found. They talk about how in a highly successful team, everyone talks and listens roughly in equal measure. So when we talk about the chemical bond that is friend groups and people groups, that seems to be one of the super key parts of it. Is a successful team means that the quiet, less experienced members talk as much as everybody else. And that's something that kind of goes unnoticed in a real life corporate boardroom, is that we don't, I don't know how to say it, we don't value somebody that doesn't have as much experience, but their input means something, not just because it's like telling you an outsider's view or somebody who is new to the business or new to the company, but it's also because they're telling you what you need to be aware of as an outsider.
Where other people might be intelligence-wise on this, what they know about it.
Right. If everybody in the boardroom is like Mad Men, where like they all know the business that they're doing, somebody who is newer is going to show you your blind spots.
Yeah, because you forgot that stuff, because to you it seems so elementary, but that's where everyone else is at on it. They're still in elementary school and you're in Harvard on this thing.
Right, exactly. And this article also talks about how good team members are able to face each other and share gestures. They can connect directly. They can carry on back channel conversations or side conversations. They can periodically go on breaks and explore their ideas. So basically, everything Google found out and what they talk about in this HBR article is that a huge portion of being on a productive team, like a literal perfect team, and that's what Google tried to find, is things that aren't related to the team. It's being able to communicate and carry on outside of the team.
you think that productivity would come being all obsessed about work. And when you're not at work, you're taking tests and learning new skills to take back to work to talk more about work.
Right, exactly.
Not Game of Thrones, not the Cincinnati Bengals football game, or, baby pictures.
Right. Yeah, that it's getting down to business, quote unquote. According to this article, they talk about how 35% of the variations in a team's performance is accounted for simply by face-to-face interactions. And that a good team, they have dozens of interactions per working hour. So, like, when we're talking about, like, productive team time versus, like, interaction time might actually be slightly more important than, like, boardroom time. So, like, when we're talking Game of Thrones, like, water cooler talk, that actually might be as important as, like, in the boardroom crunching time. Which kind of makes me appreciate you a little bit more, Todd. Because almost every one of our interactions in the car or whenever we're outside of an episode is it's shooting shit. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we just do that naturally.
Now, something they do point out in this article is that a lot of the engagement, the one-on-one conversations are quite short. It does not seem to be individual time outside the boardroom is short, unproductive, and not necessarily about any one given thing. It is effectively what we covered in another episode Robin Dunbar called social grooming. So it is just sort of like literally shooting the shit. It's just people killing time.
You're not trying to make a point. You're not trying to convince anybody of anything.
You're right.
Just emptying your little well and then on with your day.
Right, but it is, as they point out in this article, it's positive communication patterns. Basically, simple approaches like this, where just people come together and sort of like socially groom each other and communicate and work things out, that seems to help more than what research would have otherwise anticipated. And that is actually, I think, why Google had such a hard time with this, because they should be able to instantly crack any nut they come across. Like Google's analytics, I mean, their search engine and the research and data they have absolutely destroyed any problem they've ever come across. Like their research and analytics are so powerful, anything they have ever approached, they've solved. This was a nut to crack because I think it didn't make sense to them, because it was like it proved that communication is much more important than individual ability, and I think that's what threw Google for a loop.
And yeah, to have 180 teams, and then for it to already be in a specific industry with a specific education level too, they already had the fish kind of cornered right in this aquarium.
Right.
Another social grooming one, sports one, and I didn't think about it until you're just doing this research. The NBA and the NBA basketball and the NFL football, a lot of the players, when they go up to another player on their team, they have an individual handshake, this elaborate, handshake that they do just with them.
Oh, really?
And so they practice it so much, and they're pretty complicated. I mean, it's like this big patty cake thing.
Right.
So that's huge social grooming. That means I like you. We have our own handshake.
Totally. I mean, that I was just thinking about that in people I work with, where like we don't have a physical handshake, but we have like our own inside jokes, and like we have a social system we sort of obey, like person to person. Have you ever heard of Robert's Rules of Order?
Like we do 10 minutes of this, 6 minutes of this.
Right.
I love the structure.
The research kind of shows that eschewing Robert's Rules of Order might actually help meetings. So does switching out team members and giving newer people more leeway to give feedback. Not allowing people to sort of use data as a yardstick.
or having managers ramble.
Right, exactly.
You got time and you got to make a point. You got to be prepared, and then you're up. And trust me, if you've ever had meetings with it, it's so much better.
Yeah.
You actually have a takeaway. You actually get something done. It isn't just talking about the next meeting.
Yeah, we're not saying that everybody in a boardroom should kind of have the reins to ramble, but not allowing quote unquote experts to dominate a meeting. That really seems to be everything Google has uncovered in this. Like it's not having an expert dominated meeting, having everybody have a say, and having open communication seems to really be the key.
So what you were just talking about was they offer the data up, but they don't give a strong opinion of what it means. They let everyone digest it. And
precisely. Yeah, that is a really good way of saying it. So just out of curiosity, Todd, have you ever done a trust fall?
yeah, right. Yes, I have. Have you?
Yes. We did a half-hearted trust fall at my work. We had everybody gather around and like put up their hands like we're gonna trust fall, and then like we also had a desk in the way, so you couldn't actually possibly fall. Like they were not confident in their own employees to catch us.
There's no trust then. Have you done the human pyramid?
No.
Party thing?
Have it?
Well, yeah, it's easy when you're young. When you get older, the whole people start climbing up the thing. There was a nonprofit I knew down in Arizona, and I worked out of the same building as them, and this cracked me up. They had some of their, they had like a senator visiting from Washington, D.C., so they can get more money, right? So they called it a corporate team building to scrub the office clean. They all became maintenance janitors, and I'm like, that's not team building.
No, that's
they had to
saving money.
They actually had to call it that. But in my outside sales career, I was working for HSBC at the time, biggest bank in the world, and we all had our own territory, so we were all lonely outside sales reps. We didn't work from an office; we just worked from our house. So we all got together for the annual sales conference, and we were in Tampa Bay, Florida, and we got to go to the Bucs Stadium. Now, only about half of us, that's the NFL football team there, only half of the people are sports fan. But they just made it so first class. They let us get in the locker room, and we all wore shirts that from our territories with our other people who were in our geographical region, and had a name on it, and we had the same colors.
Oh my God, you had jerseys?
We had jerseys. We got to run out of the locker room. Now, usually when you go to a football stadium, you're cheering the NFL players, right? You're fans.
Right.
They had NFL players there cheering us. And it was just so fun. And we played football contests that were kind of easy because we're on all different ages and all different, physical conditions. And we competed against each other. And there was no jealousy. In sales, a lot of jealousy over who sells more, who makes more money. That was all gone, and we just had fun. And we just all liked each other more afterwards.
Okay. So it worked.
It worked 100%. And we all just felt like we were connected, and we had laughs. And then to this day, if I see those people or talk to those people, a lot of them I'm still friends with on LinkedIn or Facebook, we still talk about that. And that was in 2007.
That's awesome. That is so much better than my trust fall or our corporate team building. I love that so much more.
I'm not trying to one-up you here.
You were listening to the One-Upman podcast. So this comes from University of Texas, San Antonio. And this supports what you just said. It's team building exercises do work. But the problem is that you actually have to get what's called buy-in. So, like your fellow employees, they actually have to agree that this is valued, that this isn't just like a waste of time.
So you can't have the eye rolling. Here we go again, Babel.
Right. If you feel like you're in an episode of The Office and everybody is just sort of like rolling their eyes and yawning, quote unquote buy-in will not work, and there will be basically no value. But they talked about how in terms of outcome, team building was as a business model, as sort of like a multi-billion-dollar industry, it's overvalued and that it's overused. But when people do buy in, it is effective. It gets people to communicate more. That's actually the biggest part. You said that you had people who were still contacting you on LinkedIn and who were still sort of communicating with you. That is actually what you want out of a team building exercise. So when we teased at the beginning episode that we would get into what makes effective team building, that is it. It is opening that line of communication.
And the lesson for this too is on the buy-in thing is people with bad attitudes are not going to get better. You don't want them on your team. Cut them out early.
Right, exactly. So when you start a team building exercise, make sure that, I hate to say it, but don't try to single people out, because that is an easy way to destroy a team building exercise. Don't pick people out to be team leaders or to be team, what do you call it? Don't have people be the linchpin on a team. Don't have people be like the Terminator on a team. Just group people together.
Let them work it out.
Exactly. Get them to communicate. That's really what you're trying to do, is you're trying to build communication. You are not trying to build a quote-unquote team. You are just trying to get them to talk to each other, and to challenge them together. Group cohesiveness is what you're trying to build. You are trying to literally get them to release oxytocin, to put things into a hormone perspective. You just want them to feel accomplished and to start talking to each other. And this is upheld by Google too. Their analytics and their team collaboration, their system that they built. It really just came down to good communication. Any team building is really just to open that up.
What I'm going to take from this too is that's not forced. Because we all know how that is when you're trying too hard and then everyone feels uncomfortable.
Right.
And just let it happen organically, naturally, whatever you want to call it.
Right. I almost want to have a podcast team building now. I want us to go do paintball or something.
You definitely would at that. This time, you bring out a real bow and arrow and probably kill me with it. I guarantee you're better at shooting things than I am.
That is the end of the episode. Episode 50 is we go to a paintball episode and only one of us comes back.
I think we spent enough time together. I'm good. Teams are huge. From 2001 to 2021, collaborative activity in business has risen 50%. And yet, the best resource people and employees in the highest collaborative demand are often the least engaged, least satisfied teammates. As the research shows, teams that failed at one activity often failed at everything else too. So once you burn out those hard workers, you can kiss the team goodbye. To get everyone engaged and to make everyone a resource, i.e., to build the ideal team, you can't just stick all of your all-stars in one boardroom, or stick a big group of work friends on a project, or expect all your extroverts to slay the problem. Instead, try to foster a diverse atmosphere of open, safe communication. Good communication plays more of a role in team success than intelligence, personality, and skill all combined. When you go looking for team leaders, they should understand the value of openness and vulnerability. They should be able to talk about what's bothering them, what's putting pressure on them outside the meeting room. But they should also take into account the value of face-to-face interactions, respectful side chat, coffee talk, and social turn-taking. Again, it's all about fostering communication on every level. When we think of the ideal team, we shouldn't think of a room full of hotshot suit-wearing experts like Mad Men. Instead, we should imagine a functional workplace culture. High fives, Game of Thrones chat, and baby pictures might not seem important at the time, but in between the social grooming, you'll see the light of creative innovation shining through. That, or the light you'll see is from Google's HR Spotlight, recording your every bathroom break and office birthday party. You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
You can connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com, where we have research links, show notes, and blog articles for each of our episodes. We also appreciate feedback, and we love spirited debates.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.